Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how are you doing?
Doing all right. Had a real dinner tonight, even though Mom's out of town, because I went and had dinner with Sarah and family. So I sat next to your niece.
So that's the only way that you'll have real dinner by yourself, is if someone else is doing the
only
cooking.
way.
Is someone else is doing the cooking, is what you're saying.
Certainly better than last night's where I made a frozen pizza.
Frozen pizza is real dinner. As someone who lives by themselves, I would say frozen pizza is real dinner. Where we get into the gray area...
It wasn't very heavy in the vegetables.
We get into the gray area when we get to the is 2 hot dogs a dinner. Now, I am inclined to vote yes, as someone who has had 2 hot dogs for dinner a lot of times in their life.
Are they chili cheese dogs? Or
no, just straight plain hot dogs. Is that a dinner? Maybe. What? Who really knows? Who's to say?
So are you saying then that ketchup is a vegetable?
I mean, it's a fruit. It's a smoothie, right? Technically, it's fruit.
It's a fruit smoothie.
Yeah,
it's a fruit smoothie.
That's what I'm going to go with. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But anyway, we are here today to do a little work here Thursday, May 9th, evening of, to do a little bit of a deep dive, continue our deep dive series. Today, we're going to go over the 2 linebackers that the Packers drafted. We're going to be talking about Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M, who the Packers took with the 45th pick in the second round. Not the 45th pick of the second round, with the 45th pick in the second round. And then talking about Tyron Hopper, linebacker out of Missouri, who the Packers took in the third round, pick 91. So really excited to get to both of those. Before we do that, though, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes, stats that we find interesting when we're doing this research, articles and content from other Packers content creators that we find interesting. One-stop shopping for everything Titletown, so come check us out there. And then subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We can put all our episodes out on YouTube, but don't worry, it's just audio. You don't need to see our ugly faces. So nothing too scary there. It's not Halloween yet. But thank you so much.
Here's something I got to say.
Am I not allowed to speak for you too? Am I not allowed to speak for you as well? Do I have to say
I'm a geneticist, and so based on genetics, the chances are very, very high that you're good looking.
Oh, are they? Thank you, Mom.
Yes.
Well, anyway, we are here today, like we said, to talk about Cooper and Hopper. I'm sure I'm going to call them Hooper and Copper at least one time in this episode. But before we do, we did have a bit of news. Firstly, a couple of roster moves. One set of moves was immediately post-rookie minicamp. The Packers signed wide receiver Julian Hicks, wide receiver Dimitri Stanley, and offensive lineman Lessida Smith, and then released corners Anthony Johnson. Don't worry, not Anthony Johnson Jr., the safety, but corner Anthony Johnson. Defensive lineman DeAndre Johnson, and then waived injured wide receiver Thyrick Pitts. We'll get into those 3 guys that they signed at a later date when we start breaking down more of the 90-man roster stuff and who's on the bubble, who's looking to get cut, who's going to make the team, et cetera, et cetera. But those moves were made kind of all in conjunction with one another. And then we did have another move a few days later, actually just today. The Packers claimed defensive end Spencer Wage, I hope I pronounced that correctly, off of waivers from the 49ers and waived defensive tackle Rodney Matthews. So added another lineman. These are a lot of just, fringe roster moves at this time of the year. But just figure we should just keep track of them, keep them in a bucket. The other bit of news, and I guess not really news, is we did have our first series of press conferences for the coordinators as well as the position coaches. Now, Dad, I don't know if you got a chance to watch these. It's a shame because Packers, like the social media team, used to post all of the interviews for the position coaches, but now they're not posted in video format anywhere. They just have quotes from them floating around, which is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. We do still get the videos of the coordinators, so there is that. But Dad, I picked out 5 quotes that I found most interesting. I know you didn't get a chance to look at them yet, but I wanted to bounce these off of you and just kind of see what you thought. The most interesting one I found was from Luke Butkus, the Packers offensive line coach. This is via Matt Schneidman of The Athletic. Packers offensive line coach Luke Butkus says they'll cross-train guys, but, quote, obviously Josh Myers is our center, end quote. And Matt Schneidman went on to say not that he didn't think that Butkus was saying that he was the starting center, but more so I thought the interesting piece there was that he would not be cross-trained at guard. Dad, what is your reaction to hearing that?
So I guess I hadn't really thought it was, I was thinking it was more Josh Myers is a center. But this says Josh Myers is our center. Those are two very different things.
Yeah, which I think is why Schneidman wanted to clarify that. But I do still think it is interesting. And in talking with some people, it's like, hey, if they're not cross-training him at guard, they probably want him to be the starting center. Because if they were looking at competition there, because it's either they're completely done with him and they don't want him on the field at all,
right,
or they want him to be the center. Because if they wanted him to be competing, they would be trying him at multiple spots. But it sounds like they're not going to do that.
And this has been the report we hear a lot from a lot of different people, that the Packers are higher on Josh Myers than inside the building than almost everybody is outside the building.
Yeah, and I think part of that is that they really like what he does pre-snap, which is harder for us to evaluate because like all we can see is like, hey, he missed this block here. Hey, he's getting beat by this here. Hey, he missed his landmark in the run game here. But I think they just like the way that he holds that line together. That's my only explanation, because on the field, and the other thing is, I was listening to, I think it was Brandon Thorne on Locked On Packers today was talking about Josh Myers, and he's like, what you got to remember is like Myers came into the game, or like came into the league, that is, he only had like 20 some starts at the college level, and he came out a year early, and that he's still a bit of a raw player coming out. And at this point, we're getting to the point where like, hey, if you're a raw player, you need to develop. But Brandon Thorne was saying, and like he has a great Substack, Trench Warfare, which I recommend to everyone. But he was saying is like he's not giving up on him yet. He thinks that the size and movement skills are still tantalizing enough where you see what he has for one more year at center, and the fact that they seem to like what he does pre-snap. But yeah, so I found that interesting. The next quote that I found interesting was from Tom Clements, the quarterback coach. This is via Rob Domofsky of ESPN. Clements on one of the things Jordan Love changed the second half of the year. When he got out of the pocket, the first half of the season, 95% of the time, he ran the ball. Second half of the year, that flipped. Maybe not 95%, but he was looking to throw the ball down the field. What do you think about that?
That's kind of amazing, actually. And so what changed for him to have so drastically changed his sort of decision-making process to go from, running for yards to running to extend the play, as it were, extend the passing play?
So that's one direction you could go. What I actually found interesting out of that, and I think that's an interesting thing, I think, maybe just feeling more comfortable with where receivers were going to be. Receivers running the right route more of like a larger amount of the time probably helped as well.
It could be that people, like he's instead of, he's able to look downfield and find somebody because they're somewhere near where they're expected to be.
Yeah, but what I actually found interesting was because I thought, personally, as the season went on, he could have used his legs more. Because there were times, like in that San Francisco game, it was like, oh, just run. Just take off and run. Like, you got daylight.
Especially that last pass.
Yeah, but like there are times where I think that, we were, at the 5% throwing, 95% running, and then we were at 95% passing, 5% throwing. I think that there is still a middle ground to be reached there where I would like to actually see him use his legs a little bit more. Because we saw early in the year, specifically that Saints game, had that great run down the left sideline. The Lions game earlier in the year, they had that design zone read. That was more of a design run, so that's less of that. The Falcons game in week 2 where he took off running down the right sideline. But even, the Bears game where he did have that fumble, he made a really nice move to get the first down before he fumbled. I would like to see him use his legs more because, as we know, scrambling is a very productive part of a lot of offenses, of most offenses.
Right. It's worth more than...
It's worth more the average scramble. This study was done 2 years ago. This study was done like 2 or 3 years ago, I think. So just keep that in mind. But the average scramble was worth more by EPA per play than a Patrick Mahomes drop back, which is just a stunning metric. And part of that is, a lot of these scrambles happen on 3rd and 4th down, so they're very high leverage plays, which swing EPA a lot. But it's still something interesting where it's like, hey, scrambling is an important part of a modern offense, and I would like to see him do it more. So that was why I found that quote interesting. The next quote is from Ben Sermons, the running back coach. This is via Paul Brettel. Quote, I think he's definitely capable, end quote. And this was about A.J. Dillon possibly doing some of the H-back responsibilities that DeGuara had. Dad, are you buying that? Or do you think the lack of success in Pony Package 2 years ago is just like, hey, what are like we've tried this? Why should we try it again?
Your roll. We already tried it once.
Yeah.
So this is the first time I have heard sort of people reporting rumblings that, or I don't know if it was rumblings or speculation, but this is the first thing I've seen from the team about this notion. So, and you and I have talked a little about that. Dillon's, while his like blitz pickup and pass pro are pretty good, that his run blocking and the few times they've tried it has not looked that great.
I mean, I hate to say it, but his run blocking is a lot like his running. Like, he's never gonna really push guys back. Like, he's not really ever moving bodies. I just don't think that that's his role. I think he's a really solid third running back who can catch some passes for you. Like, he's going to be I think just like a supercharged break in case of emergency guy. That's kind of what I'm thinking he is this year.
Yeah, that's kind of what I expect too.
Well, so what do you think? Do you think he could be the H-back on this offense, or do you think that that's just like lip service pretty much?
Well, the fact that he can kind of move around, be handed the ball once in a while, and catch passes out of the backfield, is some of the things you want. But in terms of being a lead blocker or split out in the slot once in a while or do other things like that,
see, I almost
not so much.
Yeah, I don't think he can be a real like lead blocker. It's not like DeGuara was elite at that, but he was solid at that. I do think, there are times where Dillon would get into space and like do an okay job blocking for Jones and
there
that,
are
but
a
not
few of those
between
plays.
the tackles. Not between the tackles at all.
No, but you have seen some in space where I forget who it was again. So he goes out and leads, and maybe was it a touchdown run somewhere in the red zone.
Yeah,
nice
I think it was 2 years ago now. I can't remember which team it was.
It wasn't
against,
last year. It was 2 years ago.
I was going to say the next thing, as I think we've kind of tied that one out. The next quote that I found interesting from a coach was from Rebrovich, the defensive line coach. This is also via Rob Domofsky of ESPN. Quote, "It's an attack front. It's about tackles for loss and sacks. We're looking to create havoc in the backfield," end quote. And then he went on to say it should be similar to what the 49ers, Jets, and Texans do. That last part was the part that I found most interesting. Any thoughts on that?
I would like to say, I think it actually fits with the skills of some of our players. I think it's something that Wyatt is best at, and I think Wooden and Brooks as well. So I think we've got the guys for that. So it'd be nice, actually, if they're going to play in a style that fits the strengths of our players. I think it'd be exciting. It'd be fun to go after and play in the opponent's backfield.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of doesn't it remind you a little bit about what they were saying last year, though, where they're like, hey, we're going to be trying to get upfield a lot more. We're going to try and be more gap penetrating. Because that was kind of a lot of what they said last year.
But it was, we already knew what that coaching system was.
That's true. I just, because when I heard that, I was like, okay, I heard this last year, and yeah, they did do that more.
If we were hearing this again from a Barry-led defense, then you would really be like, where's my salt?
Fair. Yeah,
I want a giant block of it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, last one. This is Jeff Hafley, and I think this kind of leads well into our conversation. Jeff Hafley, he was asked specifically about, stopping the run with smaller linebackers, because, the guys they drafted, Edgerrin Cooper's 230 pounds, and Tyron Hopper's around like
231, I think.
231, yeah. They're both around 230 pounds. Quote, "Well, Quay and Cooper," and actually he was being asked about Cooper and Quay Walker. "Well, Quay and Cooper are pretty big guys. I mean, they're 230-plus pounds. I mean, the day of playing with 255-pound linebackers, I'm not sure there's many of them left. We've got big backers. I'm not worried about those guys stopping the run. They're plenty big," end quote. Any thoughts?
Well, that's the trend. And I was what I was looking at for all pro linebackers over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into that data because I did think that was an interesting find by you.
Yeah, and one thing to say about, not only are they not 255, in the last 5 years, there are only 2 all-pro linebackers who've been over 240.
Yeah. And part of that is maybe Fred Warner dominating the conversation a little bit, but still, a lot of the best linebackers these days are smaller. Like Hafley said, these bigger 255-pound plus guys can't run like you need them to, or they're like super freaks like Leighton Vander Esch, which is like, I mean, that we were talking about him earlier. It's like, I did not realize how big he's. 256 pounds. It's a shame he had to retire. But anyway, so that kind of leads us into our main topic of discussion for the day. And that's the deep dive into these 2 linebackers. Now, you might say, hey, like, what happened to Javon Bullard? What happened to Marshawn Lloyd? They were picked before Tyron Hopper. And that's true. But we kind of felt like it made more sense topically to talk about both of the linebackers together. But if you're interested in hearing about Javon Bullard and Marshawn Lloyd, don't turn that dial, because we're going to be talking about every single Packers prospect for the rest of, until we're pretty much out of them. We're going to be doing probably 2 to 3 a week. So tune into that dial next week. I think we'll probably be talking about all of the safeties together. And we'll be doing an episode a week for the rest of the offseason. Once we're done with those deep dives, we're going to start talking about training camp. We're going to start talking about 53-man roster predictions. We're going to start talking about, approach, talking about the competition within the NFC North. So don't tune that dial. We're going to be, working through this 1 episode a week for the rest of the offseason, and then we're going to be doing 2 episodes a week in the season. So, keep on checking in. And also, we did our deep dive into Jordan Morgan last week. So if you want to check that out, that's on your timeline. So go check that out as well. But Dad, getting into it, should we start with Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker, Texas A&M, now Green Bay?
Green Bay Packers.
You're right. Should we get to it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Players excited about it.
So, Edgerrin Cooper, 2nd round, 45th overall pick. Just a couple quick facts about him. This is from Dane Brugler's The Beast Guide, which is, one of the most, one of the best references, best resources for draft content that has ever existed. He's 22 years old. He was born in Covington, Louisiana, which is a little bit north of New Orleans. And he is an avid outdoorsman. He hunts and fishes, which he has said he is excited to continue doing in Green Bay. And he owns 5 dogs. He's going to be wearing number 56 in Green Bay. And so that does it for the bio. Before we start getting into deep dive stuff, Dad, what was your initial reaction when the Packers made this pick?
So I was really glad that they were able to get him. I was kind of afraid that we'll call him not a tweener player, but a tweener pick, that it was a little too rich to get him at 25, and then he was going to be gone by 41. That's kind of where I was often not able to get him because of that. And I basically always picked him when he was still around at 41. But luckily they were able to get him, and they were even able to trade back at 4 spots and still get him at 45 and add a couple of picks. So I was
playing with fire. Trading back there.
I know, because it seemed to me that the drop off between him and the second best healthy linebacker,
I was going to say that's an important
was substantial. So how did you feel about it?
So for me, it was like, yeah, that makes sense. It was the pick that made the most sense of any of the Packers picks. Like, okay, you have a massive need at linebacker already. Even if you had stayed in a 3-4, you had a massive need at linebacker. But you're moving to a scheme where you need another linebacker, and he's the best linebacker on the board, and he fits your athletic thresholds, and you've met with him multiple times. And he's kind of fallen a little bit past where consensus had him ranked. So it was just more and more and more things where it's like, yeah, it 100% makes sense that they'd pick him here. And I was happy with the pick at that number. There was a rumor going around post-draft that was like, hey, the Packers thought about taking, Edgerrin Cooper at 25. I think that's just frankly probably not true, because if that was true, they wouldn't have traded back from 41. But apparently the Packers were very high on him, which we knew from, all the meetings they had with him. And, that was my reaction. It was like, my initial thought of him going into the draft was like, I'm a little worried about how small he is at 230, because he came into the combine weighing 230 pounds. And to me, if you come into the combine weighing 230 pounds, to me, I'm like, okay, so what did you weigh when you were playing? It's like, were you 225 when you were playing? But a bit of those concerns were, diving a little bit deeper into his numbers. The fact that he weighed in again in his pro day, he didn't forgo the weigh in and just test. He weighed in again in his pro day at 229, which is right on the dot pretty much. And it's like, okay, you didn't bulk up for the combine, weigh in, wait, lose all that weight, do your testing at your pro day. And I can't blame anyone for doing that, because, go get your money. But, I was a little bit worried. It's like, hey, is 230 really his playing weight? Because that's already on the lighter side of linebackers. But no, so those were my initial thoughts. But we're already talking a little bit about his weight and his testing, Dad. Do you want to take us into his athletic profile?
Sure. So one thing, yeah, and I should say that he weighed the same, and it's not like he jumped much weight and ran a little bit faster on his pro day. He actually ran better at the combine.
Yeah, there was a couple things he did better at his pro day.
He did better on the broad jump, and the shuttle and the 3-cone he only did at his pro day. And then he actually did better on the vertical at the combine than he did at his pro day. These are numbers. Place I go to compare combine and pro day is draftscout.com. it's a really handy site for finding players' pro day numbers compared to the combine numbers, and also to find out when somebody's pro day is going to be. I use them a lot when I'm looking for numbers. So I'm doing some very quick adding of a pro day broad jump to Edgerrin Cooper's profile.
Ah, nice. Well, so
because it wasn't in RAS. So here's what mostly what I've done. I've gone from using the RAS.football site for player the percentiles for the physical profile of players, their testing and their size, except for hand size, arm length, and wingspan, where I'm getting the percentiles for those measurements from Mock Draftable. And sometimes I can only find like the wingspan for a number of players on Draft Scout. There's not listed on Mock Draftable, though. And I should say, yeah, what are you talking about, players? You're only looking at 2 players here. Well, I also, while I did this exercise, looked at the physical profile and testing for the 27 players who made up the All-Pro linebackers for the last 10 years for comps. So just getting into Edgerrin Cooper of it all, his RAS was 9.13, and that was just based on, that didn't have the little boost he would have gotten from the extra 2 inches he got in the broad jump, whereas an even 10 feet instead of 9'10". But he was 75th percentile height, 6'2" and an eighth, which is, so I also compared them to Green Bay's average linebackers under Gutekunst. So he's a little bit taller than the Green Bay's average. 41st percentile weight at 230 pounds. So which is 5 pounds lighter than Green Bay's average, a little bit lighter. 76th percentile hands, a little bigger than average. 95th percentile arms at 34 inches. So very, very long arms, and 94th percentile wingspan at over 80 inches. So his hands, arms, length, and wingspan are all bigger than Green Bay's average.
Yeah, so he's a little smaller than Green Bay's average, a little shorter,
lighter.
A little lighter. But he is a long player. You watch him play, and his arms look really long.
That's right. So he's got the longest arms of any of the linebackers Green Bay has added under Gutekunst. So that includes, like Quay Walker, whose arms were not quite so long, and his wingspan is his wingspan the longest? No, actually, Kamal Martin.
Okay, but how fast is he? Got to go fast, Dad. Speed. I feel the need for speed with Edgerrin Cooper. How fast is this man? So
his 40 time is in the 97th percentile for linebackers at 4.51. His 20-yard split at 2.64 is in the 90th percentile, and his 10-yard split is in the 95th percentile. So super fast out of the blocks.
And let me tell you, folks, we're going to be talking about his tape a little bit. I honestly expected him to run faster. To be honest, like, you watch him play, I'm like, oh, he didn't crack 4.4s. Dang, that's unfortunate. It's like that's how fast he looks, though. Where 4.51 is like, oh, thought he might be a little faster than that.
Yeah, and so then his he didn't do a bench, so we have no idea how he'd compare in that. His broad jump and vert are kind of okay. They're not in the sort of if you're familiar with that, in the green, in the top 20th percentile. So the top 20%, I should say, 80th percentile. 72 percentile in the vertical at 34.5 inches, and then the broad, well, I'd probably be in the 70s now with a 10 foot broad. But both of those, so the vertical was actually right on Green Bay's average for linebackers, but it is 3 inches less than the Green Bay's average on the broad jump. His agilities are a little bit, they vary from each other. So he's really good in the short shuttle, 80th percentile, 4.27, which is better than Green Bay's average. But then the 3-cone, he's only in the 58th percentile. So still above average, but getting closer to the middle there. And a decent amount, 19th of 100 seconds, slower than Green Bay's average. So he's up and, better than and worse than Green Bay's average, depending on which metric you look at. But overall, a very good athlete. So then, one thing I wanted to look at. So we had this question. It's like, okay, he seemed small at first glance. And if we want to try to, wrap our mind around chances of him being a superstar, for example, how does his profile compare to what you have to be an all-pro linebacker? So I looked up all the all-pro linebackers from 2014 to 2023. Got 27 players, and I used RAS and Draft Scout and Mock Draftable to get their various size measurements, speed from combine and pro days and then I calculated the RAS scores based on their best measurement and testing.
Because the thing is like the reason we were looking at this, because you and I had talked about this before you did all the legwork, all the work. Because I was talking, like he's in the 26th percentile for like linebacker weight, but linebackers are a lot different than they used to be. Like we're looking at a sample, like we're comparing it to a population. Sorry to get all statisticky on you. Where it's
the
like
RAS
we're looking
database goes back to what, 1990?
I think it's like 1999 or something like that. But yeah, so we're looking back at linebackers that like would never play in the modern NFL, would never play today. Like sure, a 230-pound linebacker seems tiny when you look at all the linebackers who have played since 1999, but we're practically playing a completely different sport than they were playing in 2005.
Well, so those players would be shedding 20 pounds to get faster. Those
or gaining 20 pounds and playing on, or just playing on the edge at 250.
Or playing on the edge.
We got 250-pound defensive ends these days. But yeah, so it's like, yes, he's in the 26th percentile for weight or whatever it was, like mid-20s for weight, but that's just looking at him versus all linebackers since 1999, when linebackers today are very different than linebackers back then.
Yes. So let's just start with the size then. So in kind of figuring out what they are, so what size seems to matter like the least. So I looked at where all these 27 players, and some of them you didn't have measurements for everybody, are in terms of their different measurables, and how often they're like in the top 20%. So like the green and RAS, or above average up to the top, like from 50 to 80%, then the yellow, and then below average in the red. So for 11 of the 27 all-pro linebackers were below average in height, and 12 of the 27 were below average in weight. In fact, only 4 of the 27 were in the top 20th for percentile for weight, and none in the last 5 years were in the top 20th. So none of the 13 players were over there. And as we mentioned, they are only 2 in the last 5 years were over 240, let alone this 255 number throughout. And the average weight actually for the linebackers who are all pro is 236 pounds.
And was that the last 10 years you said?
That was over the last 10 years. So over the last 5 years, that average weight is down to 233 and a half. So it's like, that's like, a supersized meal.
Yeah. It's like
I could still even easily gain that day, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's like, that's the thing is like, yes, Cooper seems small, and it was a thing that I was concerned about. But when you actually look at the linebackers that are playing today, like Fred Warner's 230 pounds. Dre Greenlaw is 230 pounds. Like these other super successful linebackers no one is saying, hey, Fred Warner is too small. Like no one is saying, oh, he's too small to fit the run. He's too small to play linebacker. Like I think, I had like an antiquated idea of like what a true like linebacker size would be. But it's just, we need to update our thinking to like, hey, like the NFL is changing rapidly, very rapidly. And the linebackers are getting smaller, and it just is what it is.
Yeah. So for weight, he's like the 5th lightest linebacker in the whole group. If you like say we're going to add him to the all-pro linebacker list sometime in the near future.
The next year, why not? This coming year, all-pro, Edgerrin Cooper.
So
who knows?
So he would not be out of place. There are a number of players that are lighter than he is. One thing that seems to matter most when you're looking at these, that speed and the jumps matter the most. If you look at how people perform in the speed test compared to whether they're in like the top 20th percent or not, only none of the players actually in this list were below average in the 40 time. Everybody was either in the, top 20% or in the next 30, but everybody was above average. And only one of all the 25 we tested had a below average vertical, and 0 had a below average broad jump. So there's a baseline. You need to be at least above average in 40 time vertical and broad jump. And like you had like two players who happened to be below average in the 10-yard split, but we're still above average in the 20-yard split in the 40. Yeah. So those are the things that matter most, at least for predicting whether you're going to make or being able to make it into the Pro Bowl. I mean, sorry, All Pro, not Pro Bowl, All Pro.
Yeah, because Pro Bowl is junk, All Pro matters. That's what we need to know.
So agilities in the bench mattered less. About a third of the players were below average in at least one agility, and 9 out of 23, so more than a third, who actually tested were below average in the bench press.
Yeah, which is a bit surprising that the agilities didn't matter as much. But, I do think that maybe it's just like less people are running the agilities these days. I'm not sure.
Well, these are just the ones we had numbers for. I didn't include, the people who didn't test it.
Yeah.
And then, though I guess you could say that the reason it's hard to say. People who are bad at it aren't doing it. So it actually, raised.
You think it would raise it, but
raise the percent of people who actually try it.
But it didn't seem to.
So for Cooper, he would be in the middle of pack of this All Pro list in terms of agilities, top 25% in speed, but bottom 25% in the jumps.
Yeah. Okay. So,
but his overall profile, if you compare him across the board, he looks pretty similar to sort of the average All Pro running back in a number of ways. He actually got longer arms and bigger wingspan.
Yeah.
So those.
It seems like all these All Pro linebackers, they're getting smaller, they're getting faster, and I do think that is an interesting trend to keep an eye on and to keep in mind when the Packers are drafting people that maybe conventional traditional thinking would say, hey, these guys might be a little smaller on the linebacker side. But anything else you wanted to say about athleticism, or should we move on to production profile?
Why don't we move on to production profile? I've yapped on long enough here.
Well, it wouldn't be an episode of the Father Son Packers podcast if that didn't happen. But a little bit about his production while in college. He was first-team All-American and first-team All-SEC in his final year at college at Texas A&M. Looking at his 2023 numbers, these numbers are per PFF, amongst 227 qualifying linebackers. So it's like all linebackers who played, 50% of the max number of snaps pretty much. He was the number one graded linebacker in 2023 per PFF. And, normally I don't put a whole lot of stock into PFF grades. I think, the goal of statistics should be to remove the most amount of subjectivity that you can. But being number one in something is a pretty good bet. And it is, PFF grades are just like another piece of data. And I think it's important. It's an important piece of data.
But it is nice, actually, that he's not doing this in a lower tier league.
Yes.
Which also, often you get people who have these really great grades because
they're playing in the MAC.
Just so much better than the people they're playing. Yeah. They're just so much better than the people they're playing against.
Yeah. So looking at some of these numbers, he was 104th in missed tackle rate, which, sounds bad, but it's out of 227. So he's around above average in missed tackle rate at 12.4%. He was 4th in stop rate, and that's the number of stops per snap. A stop is defined as, a tackle that is a loss for the offense.
Now, is that stops, pass play, and run play combined?
So it is the number of stops per snap. So total stops so divided by total
run
snaps.
stops and pass.
Yes,
stops.
They put both into the same bucket. So 4th in stop rate, he was 11th in pass breakup rate, which is pass breakups per target. He was 153rd in yards per target, so a little below average, but we'll allow it because he was also 31st in yards per coverage snap, which is great amongst 227 linebackers. It's pretty high up there. I did think, hey, not all these linebackers are playing against the same competition, so maybe we just look at SEC linebackers, which narrows the list down to 23 players. Amongst those 23 players, he was 12th in missed tackle rate, so right around the middle, but he was 1st in pass breakup rate, 1st in stop rate, 14th in yards per target, and 2nd in yards per coverage snap. So by almost every metric, he was one of the best linebackers, both in coverage and, against the run in the SEC, which, best conference in the world in terms of football. So pretty impressive there. I also did want to...
I really like the...
Go ahead,
I just really want to say, I really like the yards per coverage snap metric much more than yards per target. Because if you're really good, your guy's not open, and they won't be throwing your way.
Yeah, I agree. I do like yards per coverage snap, and the fact that he was 2nd in that in the SEC amongst all linebackers who, fit the criteria. I do think that is impressive. I also did want to look a little bit about both his and Hopper's, blitzing numbers and usage compared to other SEC linebackers. This is amongst a subset of 20 linebackers. Because, a lot of people are talking about, like these guys, both Hopper and Cooper, kind of their shared similarity is that they were both very good blitzers and both blitzed a lot in college. So amongst those 20 SEC linebackers, he rushed the passer at the 7th highest rate of passing plays. So that's essentially like the number of times he rushed the passer divided by the number of passing plays he played on. But he was first in pressure rate, which is, pressures per pass rush snap. So when they sent him, he was very effective, very, very, very effective at generating pressure. So that's kind of his production profile. So kind of main takeaway there is it's pretty well-rounded linebacker, and did very well in the SEC this final year, 2023, kind of put everything together. They used him blitzing a good amount, and he was very effective when they did, but he was also quite good in coverage, even though they didn't, ask him as much to do that as maybe some other linebackers. Some scout quotes, moving over to, these are the professionals. Dane Brugler, The Athletic, his resource is awesome every year. I think he's like 1A when it comes to covering the draft. The Beast is one of the best guides that's ever been put out ever, and he does it every year. I think every single player that was drafted was in the Beast this year, which is just an incredible achievement. I mean, 200 some players. I mean, he's just the best. But Dane Brugler of The Athletic, he had him as his linebacker 2 and his 46th overall player. So if you remember, the Packers drafted him at 45, so kind of just around value. This is what he had to say about him. Quote, "A 2-year starter at Texas A&M, Cooper lined up as a will linebacker in defensive coordinator DJ Durkin's 4-2-5 base scheme, also seeing snaps wide as a nickel or on the defensive line. Although 2023 was a forgettable season for the program, the Aggies' defense ranked top 10 nationally, and Cooper was the catalyst, leading the team in tackles for loss, sacks, and forced fumbles. Only prospect in this class who can say that. An above-average athlete for his size, Cooper beelines to the football with outstanding closing burst and aggressive tackling. Though he has elite arm length, he can be better at shooting his hands to escape blocks. Overall, Cooper has some undisciplined tendencies and will run himself out of plays, but he has a fast-flowing linebacker who can run and cover. He has the explosive traits to be a regular on special teams as a rookie and grow into a 3-down linebacker role in the NFL. So, pretty good there." And then the other quote I found was from Daniel Jeremiah of NFL Network, also one of the best, also one of the GOATs. He had him as linebacker 1, his 29th overall player. Quote, "Cooper is a long, rangy linebacker with excellent speed and coverage ability. Against the pass, he is very smooth in his drops, playing with vision and awareness. He is very comfortable in man coverage and has plenty of speed to carry tight ends up the seam. He is an explosive blitzer and has shown the ability to separate the quarterback from the ball. Against the run, he is quick to fill in the hole and displays stopping power as a tackler. He will have some flyby missed tackles when in lateral pursuit. Overall, Cooper is an instinctive and explosive prospect who generates a bunch of splash plays. He's ready to start right away, and I believe his best football is still ahead of him." So that's what scouts had to say about him, Dad. But what did the Packers brass have to say about him when they were asked about him post-draft?
Yeah, so there were a couple of things that I found. Make sure I'm on the right part of our. I don't start reading my section on Hopper, but so Hafley I think press maybe just this week said he loves the play style, loves the versatility. He's a physical guy. He can run. He can cover. From Gutekunst, I think this was just the immediate post-draft presser. He said so. He kind of bundled it. Really excited to get both guys, linebackers. So I was talking about both Cooper and Hopper here on day two. Get guys who can run and hit and also play special teams. So we mentioned special teams, which I think is, the kind of the body type you like for special teams, linebackers and tight ends. But he also said the speed he brings to linebacker is rare and he fits regardless of scheme. And then he was asked specifically about how he'd fit together with Quay Walker. So he says, Cooper and Walker are interchangeable. All of them are, in fact, meaning all the linebackers in the room. And that both linebackers have the ability to be off-ball blitzers as well, which is something you can see on tape and a lot of people have mentioned.
Yeah. And he brought it up unprompted about Quay Walker at one point as well. It's like, we like the way he can get after the quarterback. So, it's, maybe. And they talked a little bit, I think it was Mike Golick Jr. was talking about, when Hafley was hired, it was like chaos around the line of scrimmage pre-snap. It's like, we're going to have a lot of that. I mean, we remember playing the Vikings all those years with Mike Zimmer. Going to have a lot of those double A gap mug, like have the linebackers at the thing and drop out or come forward. And I think, they got some linebackers who profile as possibly being very good at that.
Yep. And then I also have, of course, Patrick Moore, assistant director of college scouting, also took the stand after the draft. And what he said about Cooper is that he plays fast, aggressive, and physical. That he has a similar speed and intensity to Quay Walker, but a different type of game. That his game against Alabama really got people's attention, people to pay more attention to him. And he was asked specifically about the sack numbers, and he said he got more sacks in his final year, he thought, because they let him loose more than he had been before. That in part he was able to spy the quarterback and get tackles for a loss, rather than so not necessarily that he was like lining up as an edge rusher, but just that he was blitzing in, spying, and shooting the gap to get tackle for a loss, which is a little bit different. I think in the NFL, once a quarterback starts running, then it kind of depends on whether something's a tackle for a loss or a sack.
Or a sack, yeah. Well, that kind of dovetails really well into, our closing thoughts on Hopper, which is just, what we thought of him. Sorry, on Cooper, that is, which is like, what we thought of watching him. I watched the Alabama and the Auburn game from 2023, and my takeaways were, like we said earlier, the speed is obvious. I mean, sideline to sideline, he just looks like he's going at a different speed than the rest of the other 21 guys on the field. Sometimes that speed does get him into trouble running north and south. I feel like there were several times, especially in the Auburn game, where he's running up to meet the ball carrier, and the ball carrier goes about half a foot to the right, and he goes running right past them and can only get about an arm on him. I think, maybe he just needs to throttle down a little bit, but I feel like that should be easily coached out of him. He's an excellent quarterback spy, and a great blitzer. I won't say like he's not like an elite blitzer, because I do think he right now is blitzing. His success on his blitzes seem to be coming more from athleticism than anything else, rather than, I don't think he always blitzes with a plan. There were times where, on a stunt or a twist, he slows down a little bit because he's still processing what's happening in front of him. But I think that's more of just a reps thing. And in coverage, I feel like he seems to understand mostly where he's supposed to be. There's a bootleg against Auburn where as soon as he reads that it's a bootleg, he is sprinting out to the flat to the tight end to cover them and shut that down. And he kind of trips a little bit, but he clearly knows where he's supposed to be. He does a good job, checking for crossers and stuff behind him. But, he's an impressive player to watch when you watch him. And overall, I'm excited to see what he's able to do as I would assume the weak side linebacker in this defense. Dad, what did you think watching it?
So, my general feeling on it is like he was one of my most mocked players to the Packers, I mentioned. I think he really can run and hit, fills the gap aggressively, and can take players down in the backfield. He has really good closing speed, like when he gets close to the ball carrier to actually finish off the play. And apparently also able to drop and cover some. One of, the initial criticisms we had when we first saw is that he seems a little small, but I think the answer after looking at the data is he's not really.
All linebackers are really small. That was something I was hearing someone, I can't remember who it was, I wish I could, was talking about. I was like, well, he can't really take on linebackers, like with force, he can't really take on linemen, like with force. It's like, someone was like, have you watched the NFL in the past? Like, none of these linebackers are taking on linemen in space. Like, they're all trying to dip around them. They're all trying to get, dodge them and just not get hands on them. Like, no one is taking on linemen these days.
And he seems kind of good at that, actually, getting around the linemen to get in the backfield. I think he's going to be a fun player. I think he comes in, he hits with power. He is looking to lay the hammer down when he's coming in to hit either sack the quarterback or hit the ball carrier.
Yeah, I mean, he's an exciting player. I think he's a player that Packers fans are going to be excited about. I'm excited to see him in this Jeff Hafley scheme. I hope that he is let loose entirely, and I think that there's a lot to be excited about, like I said. But, Dad, let's move on to the other linebacker the Packers took, and I don't want to say the other linebacker, but the next linebacker the Packers took, we'll say, Tyron Hopper. And let's start our deep dive on him, unless there's anything more on Cooper you'd like to say.
I think I got everything in that I was, or at least that I can remember now, so we're good to go.
Fair enough. Okay. Tyron Hopper, 23 years old, grew up in Gaffney, South Carolina. Packers picked him with the 91st pick in the 3rd round. He's going to wear number 59 for Green Bay. There was not as much information about him. He has several brothers who also play football, was the interesting note that Dane Brugler had about him. Dad, what was your initial reaction for this pick?
So my very first reaction was, I was surprised. I don't think I had him mocked to Green Bay once out of, I will confess, over 100 mock drafts. Yes, I am a little bit
That few?
I have a problem.
We didn't crack 200 this year?
I didn't crack 200, but I was over 100. I gave a quick look. I was expecting a second linebacker. I was expecting 2 linebackers out of this draft because they just needed the numbers. But I wasn't expecting to get the second one this early. The only time I got 2 linebackers this early is when I picked up 2 of what I thought were the top 3, like getting Junior Colson or Peyton Wilson, who I think the medicals just scared a lot of people off.
Probably the medicals took him off the board. He didn't have an ACL in one of his knees, which is always a scary thing to hear.
So I was almost never taking the number 2 linebacker in the draft in round 3 or even round 4. And so he wasn't really on my radar.
Yeah.
So that basically was what it comes down to. If they're going to pick one this early, I thought there were still other linebackers I expected them to have ahead of him.
Yeah. For me, my reaction was classic Packers, just the random 3rd round pick where they're way higher on this guy than everyone else. I was like, this feels very reminiscent of Josiah DeGuara, where, he's getting mocked in the 5th and the Packers take him in the 3rd. Very reminiscent of Oren Burks, where he's getting mocked in the 5th, Packers take him in the 3rd.
And trade up for.
Yeah. Very reminiscent of.
You've left out.
If you want to go back further, we can go Carl Bradford, way back when.
We got Amari Rodgers.
He was getting mocked around there. That wasn't crazy reach. But
they also traded up for him.
I know, but it felt like a classic, Packers are higher on this guy than consensus. Hasn't always gone great in the past, but I guess we will see. Dad, do you want to talk a little bit about him athletically?
Yeah, so again, I did the same thing where I got his numbers from RAS and Mock Draftable and Draft Scout. He had a official RAS score of 7.42, though if you use, Brian Gutekunst said they had him faster, so instead of
they said he had him in
4,
like the
6,
high
8, 40, they had him in the high
4
4.5s, which would then have boosted his RAS to like 7.8.
Yeah, I don't understand this. These things are laser timed. What do you mean they had him in the high 4.5s?
I don't know. Did he run for you when he came to visit? I don't. Yeah,
maybe that was it. Maybe they had him laser timed at their own facility and he ran.
So
faster.
This is what I wonder when they say we had him at something. It's like
the only
way that makes any sense is if you have him run for you, and is that a thing?
Which must be a thing. Yeah.
So one thing I now see there's one thing I forgot to mention for Cooper, but first for Tyron Hopper, his top comparable on RAS was Kendrell Bell, who was the 2001 Defensive Rookie of the Year for Pittsburgh. And I forgot to mention Cooper's top comp, which was Mike Kroll, who was the 1991 Defensive Rookie of the Year. So each of them's number 1 comp was a Defensive Rookie.
So you're saying we're getting co-Defensive Rookie of the Years, is what you're saying.
That's
both
what
of the Packers.
The data's telling me.
I mean, hey, numbers never lie. You know what Jay-Z said. But anyway, continue.
So he was not as tall as Cooper. He is 65th percentile in height at 6'1 3/4. So he's a little bit below Green Bay's average. 1 pound heavier. So that's just meaningless. That's like
a pound.
Did you weigh yourself at night before you went to bed or in the morning when you woke up? That's like 1.5 pounds or 2 right there. Small hands, 9th percentile hands, and 21st percentile arms, only 31.5 inches. So not quite the condor like Cooper.
21st percentile arms, but a decent wingspan.
55th percentile wingspan. So his overall wingspan is 77 3/4. So just below Green Bay's average. So yeah, a little above average in wingspan, even though he's significantly below average. So he must have a pretty wide, like shoulder to shoulder width to have a wingspan that long. In terms of his athletic measurables, his 40 time is 73rd percentile at 4.68. However, if you take Green Bay's word for it, that would put him at the 91st percentile in the 40 time.
Which might as well, I guess. That's why they picked him.
Yeah, and so right now he's a little bit slower than Green Bay's average. His 20-yard split, though, is 81st percentile, slightly lower than Green Bay's average. And his 10-yard split is 63rd percentile, also slightly slower than Green Bay's average. Also, like Cooper did do a bench. His jumps were a little better than Cooper's, 84th percentile in the vert at 36 inches, so better than Green Bay's average. And 92nd percentile broad at 10 feet 4, also better than Green Bay's average. But his agilities are not so good. Only 38th percentile in the short shuttle and 43rd percentile in the 3-cone. Both of them slower than Green Bay's average. 4.46 in the shuttle and 7.29 in the 3-cone. If you want to do the same comparison, so we talked about what the kind of average all-pro linebacker looks like over the last 10 years. Compared to the rest of this group, Hopper would be the 6th lightest linebacker in the group, but, still only 2 pounds off from the last 5-year weight average. He'd be in the top 30% in the jumps, but bottom 25% of the agilities. And he would be, based on Green Bay's number, in the top half of the group in the speed numbers, but based on his combine numbers, he would be in the bottom 25%. So makes a difference where he is there.
It's interesting they're putting that much, that much faith into a number that is so different from his combine number. But
full tenth of a second faster almost. Like, what high 4.5s means.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, he looks rangy when you watch him. I'm not surprised that, he's able to run faster than, what was his combine? His combine was 4.68. I'm not surprised he's able to run faster than a 4.68, like when you watch him, but
he looks faster than that on tape.
Yeah, but I will say, going based on your own numbers outside of the combine and pro day stuff is, it seems a little risky to me, but I understand watching him and being like, hey, he's faster than a 4.68, and we timed him faster than a 4.68. So, that tracks for us. So fair enough.
Yeah. And 4.68 would be, only faster than a couple of all-pro linebackers from the last teams. I think only 2 all-pro linebackers had a slower 40 time than 4.68.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, he's built kind of similarly to Cooper. He's just a little less rangy, a little less fast, a little less athletic, but he's being picked, 50 picks later. So makes sense.
He jumps better.
Yeah. Although I don't have any concerns about Cooper's athleticism or Cooper's explosiveness just watching him play. But anything else athletically on Hopper you wanted to touch on? Because I think, his production profile is more interesting than Cooper's, because I feel like there are interesting stories you can tell and maybe talk yourself into. Anything else athletically you wanted to touch on? Because I'm raring
That's
to
the
go
main
at
thing.
the
When
Hopper
you
production.
compare him to the average, the thing that really sticks out for him is his agilities.
Mm-hmm.
His jumps are really close to the All-Pro average, or compare favorably to Green Bay's average, and his speed is kind of in the ballpark for other, except for the 40 time. His actually 10-yard split and 20-yard split are kind of right on for the All-Pro average.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about my thoughts on him, like watching him in a second, but
let's go into the production profile.
In terms of his production, a lot of people talk about, he was much better in 2022 than 2023. So while I just did 2023 for Cooper, I did look at both 2023 and 2022 for Hopper. Looking at 2023, he was second team All SEC in 2023. And his rankings amongst those 227 qualifying linebackers are as follows. Amongst those 227 qualifying linebackers, he was 217th in missed tackle rate. He missed a tackle on 22.7% of his opportunities, which is really bad. Really, really, really bad. This is going to be something we're going to talk about a little more in depth, is the tackling, because I think that is the scariest part of his profile. He was 115th in stop rate, so, middle of the pack. He was 53rd in pass breakup rate, so pass breakups per target, which, quite good. 128th in yards per target, middle of the pack. 178th in yards per coverage snap, so not great. That's, once again, those are amongst 227 linebackers. I did also look at the SEC linebackers for him, so that's 23 players. He was 23rd, dead last in missed tackle rate amongst those SEC linebackers.
That tracks.
He was 13th in stop rate, so right middle of the pack. 4th in pass breakup rate, 12th in yards per target, and 17th in yards per coverage snap. So, mostly average in most of those. And then I also looked at his blitzing again, once again amongst those 20 linebackers, kind of like similarly to how I looked at that for Cooper. He rushed the passer at the 5th highest rate. Now, if you remember, I think Cooper was the 7th highest, so rushed the passer a little more often, but was less successful, 14th in pressure rate. Now, a lot of people tell you that 2022 was a lot better than 2023. The tape was better, but the numbers are pretty similar. So this is among 243 qualifying linebackers in this one. So instead of being, down in the bottom 10, he was 197th in missed tackle rate. So he was bottom 50 instead. He was at 17% missed tackle rate as opposed to closer to 23%. So that's a lot better, but it's still not great. It's still pretty bad. 97th in stop rate, so a little bit better, 115th to 97th, but still not great. 69th in pass breakup rate, kind of a similar range, a little bit worse. 42nd in yards per target, that's quite a lot better, and 52nd in yards per coverage snap. So he was much better in coverage in 2022.
So that's
numbers.
Much better, the 52nd.
Yeah, much better in coverage in 2022 by the statistics than he was in 2023. That's for sure. And then blitzing again. This is looking at 23 linebackers in 2022. Oh, sorry. Amongst SEC linebackers, 20th in missed tackle rate, 11th in stop rate, 10th in pass breakup rate, 4th in yards per target, and 5th in yards per coverage snap in 2022. So he definitely was better in 2022, but it's not like he was like rocking your world statistically in 2022.
But it does seem like, just one thing I would comment on that. He seems to have done a better job of sort of discouraging targets.
Yeah.
In 2022 versus 2023.
Definitely. And then looking at blitzing again, he was also a much better blitzer in 2022. Blitzed again, or rushed the passer at the 5th highest rate, same as 2023, but instead of being 14th in pressure rate, he was 8th amongst those SEC linebackers. So he was a more effective blitzer as well in 2022. My overall takeaways from these numbers is, he's pretty good in coverage and playing in space. I am concerned about the tackling. I am really concerned about the tackling because it doesn't matter how quickly you're going to get to the ball carrier, because they talk about, how rangy he is. They like, all their linebackers to be able to run sideline to sideline. But does it really matter if you're able to catch the guy if you're not able to get him to the ground?
Miss almost 1 out of 4 tackles.
Yeah, 23%. Now imagine every 4 times
scary.
you go to tackle someone, you're just whiffing. If you want to be optimistic, though, about the tackling, we can say that while he was at Florida in 2021, so he transferred from Florida after the 2021 season and went to Missouri in 2022. While he was at Florida, his missed tackle rate was actually just 11.4% in 2021, which was half of what it was in 2023 and 6% lower than it was in 2022. So, maybe it had to do with just the Missouri defense. And if you wanted to tell yourself a story where it's like, hey, like it's the Missouri scheme. You remember how Hopper had the worst missed tackle rate amongst SEC linebackers in 2023? Well, the second worst was the other Missouri linebacker. So maybe, just the Missouri scheme put their linebackers in tough positions. That's something you could tell yourself. I'm not going to tell you what to tell yourself, but if you want to make the case that the tackling is not as bad as the numbers, you could be like, hey, he was better at Florida. He went down as soon as he went to Missouri. The other Missouri linebacker also struggled to tackle in 2023. There's something there. But he's been a pretty high usage blitzer, and I'm interested in whether or not that's something that they want him to do going forward. So that's my main takeaway on the production is that tackling is scary. But I do think that there's something there in coverage, and you can maybe talk yourself into the tackling, maybe being better in the NFL. I am skeptical. That's the thing that scares me the most. In terms of scout quotes, or is there anything you wanted to touch on there?
Oh, just one thing I'd like to say about the tackling is if you compare them to the Packers' other draftees and additions, the only one who's been better of their draftees in compared to his Florida tackling numbers, missed tackle rate, was Quay Walker of their draftees.
I mean, Quay coming out of college was such an elite tackler.
Like
he was
5.1%.
Yeah.
And then of other players who played a lot of snaps for them, Devondre Campbell was also better in college. He was 5.1% in his last year, 7.6% for his career.
Because that 11% number, like that's a very good number. That's super respectable.
Better than Isaiah McDuffie, better than Ty Summers, better than Oren Burks, better than Kamal Martin.
You're not helping him. You are listing a bunch of bad linebackers. Thank you, though.
Better than Edgerrin Coopers.
Okay, we're going to get to the scout quotes now. Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him as his linebacker 11 in the Beast. Quote, a 2-year starter at Missouri, Hopper played will linebacker and defensive coordinator Blake Baker's 4-2-5 base scheme. After struggling to find a regular role at Florida, he transferred and averaged 5.8 tackles per game in 2 seasons with Missouri, earning all SEC honors as a senior. With his initial quickness and rangy speed, Hopper aggressively responds to ball carriers and pass catchers and closes in a hurry. However, he lacks the play strength desired for an every down role and needs to improve his block awareness. Overall, Hopper needs to be more consistent at the point of attack and as a finisher, but he is a fast-flowing athlete with the pursuit skills and blitzing talent to find a home in the NFL. He projects as a run-and-chase rotational linebacker with the skill set for special teams. And then Lance Zierlein of NFL.com said, quote, an off-ball linebacker with length, speed, and agility, Hopper is lacking in field vision and instincts. He can be a step late to diagnose play design and has moments where he looks lost in coverage. Hopper has sideline-to-sideline range and plenty of physicality to hit what needs to be hit. There are holes in his game that can be exploited, but he has traits and should get a chance as an NFL backup with special teams value, end quote. Dad, what did the Packers have to say about Hopper?
Yeah, so the most I was able to find, the person who had the most to say about him was Gutekunst, in the things that I found anyway. Said he's really physical, he can run. His stopping power when he takes on blockers is impressive. He mentioned stopping power twice in that press conference. And I also mentioned that he's, fast on tape when saying that they had mentioned him in the high 4.5s for the 40 time. He also, grouped him together with Cooper, saying both linebackers have the ability to be off-ball blitzers. And then in a later interview with one-on-one with Larry McCarron, he also repeated the stopping power comment and that he can run. So he really he was really fixated on those two things, his stopping power and that he can run. LaFleur, after like the mini camp, the rookie camp practice, and talking about alignment, specifically about Hopper being in the middle of the field in rookie camp, said that, players will be moving around organically. It didn't necessarily mean, I think, that a decision has been made on where his spot's going to be, but that they'll try him that and they'll be moving around everywhere.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it's going to be an open competition between him and McDuffie, I would imagine. But I guess we'll see.
To me, that they're kind of similar players in a lot of ways. I feel like.
You think?
Style.
I think that Hopper is better at taking on blockers than McDuffie, but
I'd sort
McDuffie's
of
a little better at
attacking style. More of a style thing than anything.
Yeah. I guess that transitions to what we thought watching him, and it's tough. I feel like I'm in the minority here, but when I watched him, and so I watched both the Georgia game in 2023 and the Auburn game in 2022 and some of the Georgia game in 2022 as well. Dad, I really liked him. I'm not going to lie. I watched him and I'm like, I think I get it. If you just take out the tackling stuff, if I just never knew that his tackling numbers are so atrocious, I'm watching him and I'm like, I totally get this. Like, I think this is a good pick. I'm watching him, I'm like, hey, his ability to not stay blocked, like he's not going to, like, he'll thump the lineman a couple times, but he's really good, disengaging from blocks with his hands, like ripping under blockers and getting past them and disengaging from them and not staying blocked. He does a really good job not staying blocked. I think that he uses his hands well there. I think he shows a really good job in the games that I watched of being able to carry. Like there were a couple different times where, a tight end or a running back would run a wheel route, just like out to the flat and then carry it up vertically. And he just ran with them and did a really good job sticking with them. I think that he scraped really well across the line and, made a lot of plays for that Missouri defense that was really good in the SEC. And so I think if I just never knew that the tackling numbers are atrocious, I would be all the way, hyped up like, oh, this is like my guy for, because I watch him and I know some people would disagree. They don't like the tape as much. I know Andy Herman, who I respect a lot, I respect his opinion a lot, doesn't like the tape as much. I'm watching him. I'm like, I kind of get it. Like, I can see where this could work. Like, I could see where he could be a valuable piece to the defense. And then I look at the tackling numbers again and I'm like, it's really hard to be a linebacker in the NFL if you can't get the guy on the ground. It's so hard.
It's more about, can he stay on the field or if he can't finish the play?
I'm in a major conflict. Like, I'm in a crisis right now because I want to like him a lot, but that number just it scares me so much. So that's my main takeaway.
It's a number that has to be fixed.
It's prohibitive to playing. You cannot be on the field missing 1 in 4 tackles. You just can't. You will not play. You will not play in the NFL if that happens. You can't even play special teams if you're going to miss 1 in 4 tackles. That's the thing. It's like some people are like, oh, he's a special, it's a special teamer. Number one, if the first thing you say about a player drafted in the 3rd round is, oh, they'll be valuable on special teams, get out of here. That does not make it a good.
That was I should say that was kind of my gut reaction to say, oh, we got a special team. Like, really? You used a 3rd round pick for a special teamer?
Yeah,
on a special teamer?
I'd rather use a 3rd round pick on a kicker at that point. But you can't be a special teamer. You can't. It's hard to be a special teamer if you can't tackle. So it's like I don't know. I don't really know what to do with my feelings.
He's only in
Hopper.
special teams on protection.
He's a confounding player because I want to like him and I watch him, but the numbers are what the numbers are, and I'm, that's more of my thing, is a more number driven thing, and you're not going to be able to play in the NFL missing that many tackles. It just is what it is. What did you think watching him, Dad?
So I think his consensus ranking kind of had that tackle problem baked into it.
Yeah.
But if you can fix his tackling, then you might have a steal.
Yeah,
it's a big if because it's got a ways to go. Unless Florida is the real tackling when he's playing in Florida, maybe. But, when I watch his statement, I mostly watched highlights and a little bit more, but I think he's really aggressive attacking the line of scrimmage and going after the ball carrier in the backfield. It's kind of something we see at Edgerrin Cooper as well. And one of the things that reminds me a little bit of McDuffie, because at his best is McDuffie cutting through the blockers and tackling the guy in the backfield. So his top high-end plays are kind of similar to McDuffie's high-end plays. How that, they compare overall, I didn't really do, but that's kind of where I see the similarity. He also doesn't give up on plays. He keeps after it. You see this.
Yeah, I mean, we forgot to mention it, but he was a team captain as well,
Yeah, right. And one play that if you watch his highlights, I think this play must be on every single highlight, where he gets kind of caught in the wash and on the wrong side of the blocker on a run play up the middle against Georgia, and he turns around and chases the ball carrier down and punches and punches the ball out to create a fumble on what could have been a long play. So that I think says something about how he stays in the play, and this is just I'm out of it already.
It's got a high motor. I'm not it's not an effort thing at all. It's just, goodness, if you could tackle, I would like you a lot more. I would like him so much more if he could just tackle. But yeah, anything else you wanted to add on Hopper? Should we wrap up here?
I think that was it that I had there.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. This has been our deep dive into the Packers' 2 new linebackers. Dad, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Just one last thing. If you had to, someone gives you $10 and said, go bet on how the linebackers are arranged to start the season for the Packers in base, how would you line them up?
Ooh, I think it's going to be Walker in the middle.
Yep.
With Cooper and McDuffie.
Okay, so you got McDuffie at Sam and Cooper at Will, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to guess Walker at the mic because I think they want him to have the green dot. Unless, they go McKinney at the green dot, which, interesting, perhaps. But I think it's going to be Walker in the middle and, like you said, Cooper at the Will, and then I think Hopper at the Sam. So
you think Hopper's going to beat out McDuffie?
I think Hopper's going to beat out McDuffie.
I feel like Hopper and McDuffie are really close together right now.
I just think Hopper's going to get every opportunity to get that job. They probably want him to win that job because he's cost control.
They might want him to win that job, yes.
Yeah. But anyway, that's just, that's for a later date. We'll be able to talk about that a lot in training camp. We'll be able to talk about it a lot when we're doing 1 episode a week during training camp. And we'll be doing 1 episode a week, doing deep dives into the rest of these rookies and talking all about them until we're out of rookies to talk about. So come listen to us next week. We'll probably be talking about the 3 safeties that the Packers drafted, talking about the ways that they can best be deployed, talking about their strengths and weaknesses. This has been a great time talking about Cooper and Hopper, and I didn't say Hooper and Copper one time, although I did promise that I would mess it up at least once, and I did not, so I'll take that as a win.
You broke your promise.
I know. Thank you again so much for listening. If you like what you heard here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Subscribe on all 3. We could use the numbers. But anyway, thank you again so much for listening, and until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.